government bureaucratically control the health system. This was 15 years ago a very daring, a very innovative program that we had no way of knowing would be as powerful and as effective as it is today. And I think it's very important to keep the level of decentralization and the level of local autonomy needed so that smart people can get together and do smart things without having to convince some bureaucrat in Washington who may not have a clue about the science or the technology or the opportunities. So this is a great example also of why we should have better lives and longer lives and more independent lives through the kind of breakthroughs in science and technology that are accelerating and that we want to bring to the American people as rapidly as possible.
What do you think of the bipartisan dates for the State of the Union? Is that substance or just PR stunt? Or
PR, no. I have a real liability in watching the State of the Union. I actually think it ought to be about government. It ought to be about substance. I don't think it ought to be the annual campaign speech, which it's become for both parties. I think we have enormous problems as a country. And I think, if you just watch the exchange between Cantor and Pelosi about whether they'd sit together, and Pelosi tweeting that she already had a date, I mean, give me a break. But what we need to have is politicians who focus on, can we find real solutions to the enormous challenges we have? And can we find a way to reach beyond, when we passed welfare reform, half the Democrats voted for it. Because we were open to working with it.
Do you think the roadmap proposal to voucherize Medicare is something that's going to have legs?
I think in the long run, finding a way to give senior citizens more freedom and more choices, and to not have Medicare micromanaged from Washington will have legs. I don't think that necessarily means you voucherize it, but I think you want to find ways to allow senior citizens to have more choices and have more opportunities to make decisions with their doctor and their hospital and their pharmacist.
What proposal are we talking about? Where can I read more about what you're talking about?
Go to healthtransformation.net. We have an entire Center for Health Transformation with ideas like that.
Back on the State of the Union, what do you think of the kind of dueling responses from Congressman Ryan and Congresswoman Bachmann?
I think Congressman Ryan is a very serious, thoughtful person who offered a very sober and honest analysis of where we are. I think it's sobering. Unemployment numbers went up 51,000 today, above the expectation. I thought the president's speech, frankly, was shallow and lacking in seriousness. And at a time when we have huge problems, suggesting that borrowing a couple trillion more from the Chinese, to have eventually someday a long way down the road a possibility of putting people back to work wasn't a serious speech. I was very disappointed. By contrast, Congressman Ryan was very serious and very thoughtful, and I think has outlined the scale of the choices we face if we want to give our children and grandchildren a healthy, prosperous country. And I think Congressman Bachmann has done a very good job of representing the anger and the frustration and the concern of the Tea Parties, and that's fine. That's the role she's accepted, and she's doing a good job of it. But I think it's clear that the Republican response was Paul Ryan, and that it was a serious response by a serious leader.
Was she serious and thoughtful in her response?
Well, she is a very aggressive articulator of the Tea Party desire for a return to constitutional limited government with lower taxes and less spending. I think that she's a serious person.
How difficult is it going to be for the current congressional leadership to sort of manage the expectations of the Tea Party?
I don't think they should manage them. They ought to meet them. I mean, I think, for example, they should agree to pass a debt ceiling with substantial spending cuts. They should agree to pass a debt ceiling with substantial reform of the Budget Act. Now, the Tea Parties would find that very acceptable. But I don't think it's a question of managing expectations. The people of the United States have every reason to be angry at a big, expensive, sloppy federal government that is incompetent. The president made a passing joke about 3 different departments dealing with salmon. But it's not a joke. This government is too big. I have proposed recently that we replace the Environmental Protection Agency with an Environmental Solutions Agency that's fundamentally different. I have proposed that we replace the current unemployment system with a work training program that's fundamentally different. The fact is this government is way too expensive, way too inefficient, and that we have to have very serious reforms. And I think it's perfectly legitimate for the Tea Parties to demand that. And the challenge to the Republicans is to meet the demand, not to manage the expectations.
You're starting to sound like a candidate. Are you contemplating a run for the GOP nomination?
Look, I think to be a citizen leader shouldn't have to automatically mean you are or aren't a candidate. We need a national conversation at an adult level about very large-scale change. In terms of candidacy, Calista and I will make that decision at the end of February, which I've said routinely for 6 months, I think. And I'm happy to repeat it as often as I'm asked.
Can you give us the odds for whether you'll do it or not?
One more question that isn't political.
What do you hope to accomplish here today?
Well, I think we already accomplished part of it. I want to bring your attention. First of all, I want to get educated myself. I mean, having a chance to interview her and to talk about these things and to get a sense of how it actually happens is good. I've looked at hyperbaric systems for the last 6 or 8 years, but to be here to see a very successful program is good. Second, I want to highlight the potential through science and technology. I'm trying to get the House Republicans to hold a series of hope and opportunity hearings, to actually spend about a third of their hearing time on new technologies, new approaches, new science, and to show people how we could dramatically improve things today, not 20 years from now through science fiction, but today. This is a good example. If we're going to try to find out with National Healing's help, if everybody who should have a hyperbaric approach to their wounds got it, how many amputations a year would we save? Now, that's a relatively definable number, and it's a very exciting number. And then you have to ask the question, so why has it taken so long for Washington to understand this? Which they still don't. And I go around every day and try to learn, and I try to figure out, I think learning from America in some ways is more important than talking at America.
How is Washington standing in the way of hyperbaric therapy? I don't get that.
Well, I think in terms of accelerating the diffusion of innovation and diffusion of ideas.
Okay.